Hi, my name is Elizabeth Otto, and I am a professor of art history at the State University of New York and Buffalo, and that is in the USA. Um, I wanted to talk about a picture that's in the collection of the Bauhaus-Archiv. For a long time, no one knew much about this picture other than the fact that it was in the collection of Walter Gropius, the founder and director of the school, and that he'd received it for his birthday in 1924. It shows a woman holding a magnolia. She looks kind of dreamy, wistfully. She's looking off to the side, kind of posing coyly, and then her portrait is repeated and turned to the side of 90 degrees. And there's text at the bottom that says, Mein lieber Walter, bewahr unser süßes Geheimnis. Deine ewig getreue. So in English, I would say that the text says, My dear Walter, keep our sweet secret. And it's signed from your eternally true one in the feminine. And it was actually Klaus Weber, who was a longtime curator at the Bauhaus Archive, who finally identified this woman as, in fact, a man. It is Marcel Breuer. And thinking about this picture, I wrote about it more than 10 years ago, really started helping me to think through the idea of a queer Bauhaus more broadly, because this is a young male student who's writing to his teacher and director expressing his love and presenting himself as highly feminized, really in drag, as we would say. And this is about as close to the heart of the Bauhaus that we get for a queer Bauhaus. Walter Gropius was the director, and Marcel Breuer, a prize student who a few years after this would himself become one of the junior masters. But the picture is very romantic. It's very much not what we think of as the Bauhaus in some ways, with its wistful woman in the center of it expressing her love in pink handwriting. And yet, at the same time, there are elements of it that are very Bauhaus. It's rectangular, and the two pictures are joined together almost like the furniture that Marcel Breuer became famous for designing within the Bauhaus. Thinking about a queer Bauhaus more generally, jumping off of this picture, allowed me to think about who has been pushed to the margins of Bauhaus history, and why are they written out of the history? Why don't we have spaces for the romantic, for also the queer, for expressions of love between men? In this case, this picture, I think it's a sort of insider joke. There was no romantic relationship between these two men. And yet, I think the fact that there is this gender play, this presentation of love, is also really telling. The school itself was not open to what we would call queer individuals today, so gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, asexual, many different kinds, ways of being a person, ways of loving, ways of identifying that we think of today. There's nothing overt that says either way whether queer individuals were welcome or not, but there was a case I found where one student applied and seemed to be qualified enough to get into the school based on what he said. But at the end of his letter, he signed it with a male name, Hans, and indicated that he'd recently received permission from the police to dress in men's clothing, and that formerly he had been known as Johanna. So we have a particular case where someone seems qualified but was not allowed into the school. And yet, at the Bauhaus, as everywhere in the world, of course, queer people were there, and particularly there because it was a kind of beacon for young creative people throughout Europe. The Bauhaus seemed perhaps to call to queer individuals. So looking particularly at work that Bauhaus members did later allows me to kind of project back who was there and what were they doing, and how did Bauhaus circles then intersect with queer circles in their work after they left the school as much as while they were there. So there were figures like Max Pfeiffer-Wattenpohl, who also, like this Breuer photograph, made photographs of people in drag, friends of his, men and women, very camped up, say, like the dealer Johanna I, the art dealer, and also pictures that clearly are of male figures dressed up and very campy, over the top uh, garb as women. There are also photographs in Max Pfeiffer-Wattenpohl's collection of a beloved young man in a state of undress standing near a bed. So really overtly queer pictures that speak directly to homosexual desire. But Max Pfeiffer-Wattenpohl within the Bauhaus also did a very famous weaving that is often shown to represent the weaving workshop. And in a way, because it was almost always women in the weaving workshop, and the workshop was even called the women's class for a very brief period, we can see this as a kind of medium queering, that he is working in a medium that's coded pretty heavily as feminine. So as a way of being open in a gendered way. There are other figures I explore in my book, Haunted Bauhaus, like Florence Henry, the photographer who met her lover and life partner at the Bauhaus and created a circle of friends then around her that would include Max Pfeiffer-Wattenpohl. And then also figures like Margaret Leiteritz, who I identify as a queer singleton. Some of her pictures seem to speak to lesbian desire, and we just don't know if she had a partner or if she was really a singleton adamantly all of her life. But she was certainly a very free person and free artist, and declared that in some of the documents that I found, where she said, was applying for a job as an archivist, and said, I am free of entanglements and able to move to take this job from where else she was in Germany. The last person I would talk about, thinking about a queer Bauhaus, is a designer called Richard Grune, who studied for a year at the Bauhaus and went on to become a graphic designer. And he was a victim of Nazi persecution, not for his very active leftist anti-Nazi activities, but specifically for being gay. So he was arrested in 1934 and spent the majority of the Nazi years in concentration camps, again, for being gay. And he survived, which means he saw unspeakable horrors, and afterwards used his art skills kind of to remember some of what he saw and the violence that he witnessed. So I think by thinking about a queer Bauhaus, by identifying pictures like the portrait of Marcel Breuer as the girl with the magnolia, we get a glimpse of the fact that there's so much more to the Bauhaus to understand. And that if we look at it queerly, if we open ourselves up to thinking more broadly about what the project was, way beyond design or architecture, it was a practical movement, but its practicality was something that functioned in multiple ways, including exploring sexuality. And I think restoring the queer people to the Bauhaus and understanding how their sexuality and even just the chance to break out of the mold of the structured designer that Marcel Breuer so often seems to have inhabited, that these were an important aspect of the school. So coming back to this picture, I think now that we know who the girl with the magnolia is and what the sweet secret was that she's keeping and shared with Gropius, maybe we see that it's really no secret that the Bauhaus was queer just like everywhere else.